Okay, so a few years ago, I got my very first drone, something that I'd been asking for and wanting for years on end. And finally, I had enough saved up and I went and I got it. It was a DJI Mini 2, and I loved that thing. And I remember unpacking it. Next thing you knew, I was flying over the city and seeing it from a whole new perspective. One that was actually really cool and fresh and like honestly, like, okay, so I got a bit of B-roll to show you about the drone, and it's a different drone because I lost that first drone, but it was just so cool. And so I highly recommend that you should get a drone as well. They're so much fun. So I had this really cool thing that happened as I was starting to fly, and it was this thing that I started realizing that on top of these buildings were these weather vanes, and contrary to my own assumptions there was a lot of detail to these weather vanes. For example, there would be these ships that show each and every single kind of plank that was around it, or these roosters, and it would show every single feather. And I started asking myself, like, why on earth would something that from our height that we couldn't really see be done with so much detail? Like, I just didn't understand it. I was like, what's going on here? This seems weird. And well, I started digging into it, and well, there's an interesting story to the history of the weather vane. So the word weather vane, vane comes from the Old English of meaning flag or banner. And it was really used for what we know it's used for, telling us which direction the wind is from. Now, there's two kind of beliefs as to what their purposes were for on a practical level. So either it was for kind of, farmers, or, just knowing when to harvest or to plant, but I don't really think that's actually the main purpose it was used for, because they were very ornate. There was a lot of detail. And if you think about it on a practical standpoint, you've got a farmer in a field, not in a city. Why would they look to a weather vane that's in the middle of the city? If anything, they could just throw grass up in the air and they'd know which way the wind was coming from. This leads me to believe that it was actually the second reason. The second reason being that it was actually a way to kind of just flex how financially rich that building was, or that organization was. And so what you'd have in the cities, you'd have different cities hire different craftsmen to create these ornate, beautiful pieces of art that would go on top of the roof to make a statement of, look at how affluent we are. And the interesting thing is, churches got involved. Gets involved into this whole story, and it really becomes like church after church starts creating it, and they want to be able to say, hey, okay, let's share the gospel. So in the 8th century, Pope George kind of comes up with a statement of like the rooster in the story of how Peter denies Christ 3 times. That rooster is the emblem for Christianity, and so churches start doing what's to the trend, and they start putting these roosters on the top. And this is why actually there's so many roosters to this date. In fact, in the 9th century, Pope Nicholas decides and decrees that all churches are to have a rooster on their church. And that's why we have so many to this day. The thing that gets me is, here you have this idea of like, it's a competition of who could have the most ornate fashion statement, and then actually the church becomes the leader of this, because actually the rooster becomes one of the most popular emblems on top of a building. And in church history, I think this is one of the funny moments where it's like, actually the church was trendy, the church was hip and with it, and we don't see that anymore with these weather vanes. And I think it's a funny story. And so I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Bye.